Anyway, so tonight we are flying over the Atlantic to a place that I'm very familiar with and very fond of, which is the area around Philadelphia and the Main Line, and an area that I've got to know very well over the years. I've sort of lost count of how many years I've been teaching at Chanticleer, and every time I go, I just learn a little bit more and see a little bit more. But tonight we are having the most heavenly journey through the private gardens of Philadelphia. And often when I'm teaching, I'll say to people, did you know that in that area, there are at least 34 gardens that are worth seeing that are, public gardens. And they all kind of go, really, especially if they're on this side of the pond. And but this is all private gardens where it's just, you're gonna love it. You're gonna love it. I'm fortunate enough to have seen 4 of them, and there's a couple more absolutely on my hot list. So anyway, I'm going to introduce Nicole Juday. Hi, Nicole, who's based, well, you're both based in around Philadelphia, and Rob Cardillo. And Nicole is the writing arm, and Rob is the photography arm of this wonderful partnership. So welcome, you guys. Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you for having us, Annie and Noel. Thanks for everyone for being here.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure. And how we're going to structure this is Nicole's going to start off with a screen share and talk about, the gardens and the writing and details and so on. And then about halfway through, we're going to swap over and do a screen share with Rob, who's going to go deep diving into the photography, which wait till you see his photographs, they are to die for. So that's what we're going to do. And we've got a lot to get across, so I'm not going to rabbit on for much longer. I'm going to hand over to you, Nicole, and let you go into screen share and start with the information about the book.
Okay, thank you. Here we go. And that's not quite the right place to start, so pardon me, bear with me for a second.
Well, while you're doing that, obviously, as always, everybody, especially if you're new to us tonight, pop any questions you have into the chat box, and we will go through them, and at the end of the talk. So if there's something that you see, just make a note in the chat box, and we will find out the answers for you.
Sorry, so here we go.
Okay, that's okay.
Okay, so
lovely. Yeah, that's it.
So thank you all very much for being here. And I wanted to start because Americans can be so egotistical, and we think that every place, like America, is the center of the universe. So not knowing who was entirely going to be on in the presentation in the audience tonight, I just wanted to give a little bit of context about the region of Philadelphia. It is kind of mid-distance, roughly, between New York City and Washington, D.C., a couple hours in either direction. It's not on the coast. It's about 80 miles inland. New Jersey is between us and the Atlantic Ocean. And it is a region that is quite conducive to horticulture. It gets typically, and what is typical anymore, but in a typical year until recently, we get adequate rainfall. It's cold in the winter, it's hot in the summer, but not to a degree that it's really difficult to cultivate a large number of plants. The land has pleasing contours for the most part. It's sometimes called or considered the southernmost part of the northern gardening region of the US and the northernmost part of the southern gardening of the US. So if you picture that overlap, it just means that from a material or a medium perspective, there is a lot that we can grow and combine, and things that just aren't really possible other places. But we just are in a sweet spot in a number of ways that really make gardening possible, and possible to practice at a very, very high level. So this is the book, the cover of the book. Rob and I worked on this for 2 years, although we both had multiple other projects going on simultaneously. And it covers 21 different gardens in our region. I would say probably within about a 50-mile radius of Philadelphia. So in the counties that are around Philadelphia, as well as in the city itself. And something that I never considered until really until I was reading the book after it was published is that the gardens that are in the closest to the city, those are all sort of like inspired or even like copying English country estates for the most part. And then the gardens that are further out, that sort of second ring around, those are all much more informed by true sort of like Pennsylvania countryside vernacular. And that is not to say that those gardens are simpler or modest. In some cases, they were the most over the top, extravagant gardens. It's just that their inspiration comes from this kind of Pennsylvania country sort of vernacular idea, as opposed to the English country estate, which was considered the gold standard to aspire to in the golden age of Philadelphia horticulture. We were made fun of by other parts of the country because we were so obsessively Anglophilic when it came to gardens and pretty much anything else too. Um, so that's it. The book is in its third printing. We're really happy with the way that it has been received. And, I think that its success, for the lion's share of that is because of Rob's incredible photographs. And of course, every image in this presentation is a photo taken by Rob, but also because it is a story that probably should have been told before now, and for whatever reason, wasn't. And so it was an amazing opportunity for us to be able to put these pieces together and talk about why horticulture in Philadelphia is so extraordinary, why there are so many public gardens, why there are so many just exquisite private gardens of all kinds. And Philadelphia is, and anyone listening that's not from the US will think this is silly, but it is one of the more historic, not one of the most historic areas in the country. So for us, this history of European settlement going back 300 years is a big deal. And I think that that is definitely something that lends some sense of place to gardens in Philadelphia. So what we tried to do with the book is show as much as we could the complete range and spectrum of what gardening is in our area. So I mentioned the strong, strong English influence, especially that English country house influence. Here we have the Georgian estate, all the elements that you would expect to see in an English landscape. And then, we're talking about gardens that are small, very small, urban gardens that are combining the urban material culture, found objects with gardens and horticulture. And here we see again, combining found and made objects and plants. Gardens that are so creative, so abundant, so much about joy and life and experimentation and rule breaking and just complete effusiveness. And then also gardens that are so restrained, and the whole idea of just like the quietest, most luxurious image that you can possibly communicate. Gardens that where the only limit is really the imagination of the gardener. So in this case, this is a fan-shaped stairway that has been constructed out of native Pennsylvania fieldstone. And as it was built, there were pockets that were left that then could be filled with heat-loving rock garden succulents and alpine plants. So it's both a working staircase and also a theater for special rare plants. And then we have gardens that are, and this is unique in our country, somewhat unique, that really are just the apex of that old world craftsmanship everything done beautifully, the most beautiful materials, designed by the most eminent landscape architects of this kind of golden era where there was a lot of money in Philadelphia too. This is an Olmsted Brothers landscape that is featured pretty prominently in the book. And then we talk about gardens that are true labors of love, gardens where this is a third generation garden. And this gardener is so careful to steward and maintain and preserve not just the design, but in many cases, the plants themselves planted by his grandfather, kept going by his father. And he sees himself as just like the link in the chain of this intergenerational garden monument. And then that's in contrast with gardens where the owner maybe is more the director than an actor or a player in the garden. And it is very much the owner's vision, but in terms of the execution, that's all left to others. So that gives you, oh, and then so gardens that are designed to, I think this is the longest running cascade garden in a private residence in the United States. So very much designed to wow and impress you, maybe to remind all of us of our place in the social pecking order. And then contrasting that with gardens that are kind of every bit as effortful, but are created to remove any visibility of the human hand. So that really is just an overview of the spectrum of what we're talking about when we talk about gardens in Philadelphia. And again, you can see that what's so special, I think, about our book is that these ideas and these different visions and these different sensibilities have been captured so beautifully in the photography. So I'm going to go over 3 of the gardens in a little bit of detail, and then I'm going to turn it over to Rob, and he'll talk about how he captured these gardens visually and what it took. And you're in for a treat because it's fascinating to understand how his process works. So when I chose the gardens, and what I like about giving talks about this project is that I can give hundreds of different talks. And what I tried to do for this is choose gardens that each said something about Philadelphia and kind of American gardening in different ways, but were very, very different from one another. And it's just different than many, many of the other gardens as well. So this is not representative. This is just examples, specific examples. We could go on and on. So the first one is a garden that's actually in the city of Philadelphia. It's in a pretty close packed residential neighborhood. It's very like lots of foot traffic. It's across the street from an elementary school. It's down the block from a grocery store. So lots of people, very neighborhoody, very sort of like friendly kind of place. And the person that gardens, the owner of this garden, is an artist. Her name is Sid Carpenter. And garden is really where she sort of like marries her 2 practices, because she thinks of gardening as one practice and making her art as another practice. And her arrangement sounds so idyllic to me. She makes her art in the winter and she does her gardening in the summer. And I think we should all aspire to having that be how we set up our lives. And so as an artist, she's always very focused on the eye. And that's something that I learned a lot from her about the viewer's eye. And she really examines her garden to see like where are the places where the eye moves too quickly from one thing to another, or maybe skips over something. And then she'll try to fix that. Or if the eye spends too long here and neglects another area here, she's very, very attuned to how people see. And I thought that was extremely interesting, and she is not hesitant to take something apart and redo it if she feels like the eye is traveling in a way that is not is less than what she's hoping for. So she's a sculptor and she works in clay, and her entire career has really focused on ideas around the land and soil. And she's really interested in kind of the meaning of land, and particularly the meaning of land in America, where of course, the land and the soil, it's the source of all life. It's the source of what is sustaining all of us. But at the same time, land has like a very sort of like heavy, dark, painful history here too, starting with the Europeans that came and stole land from the people who had lived on it. And then with the adoption of slavery in this country, people forced to work on land that they would never ever own or have agency over. So this duality of land and soil and that tension and how something can be so fertile and abundant, but also so painful, is something that has really informed her work as an artist. But she feels very strongly that gardeners can be some of the it can help heal and can help mend these sort of like rips in society that might have started hundreds and hundreds of years ago with historical events. And she believes that even a cup of soil with a seedling in it that you give to someone else is a way of kind of healing some of the like past harms that have to do with land and soil. So, and of course, her pottery, let's go back there. Her ceramics are made out of clay, you know, and clay is dirt, it's soil itself. So she was fascinating to talk to and learn from. And the way that her beliefs and her practice of art and gardening is used, that she uses these tenets to inform how she gardens is really seen in the perimeter of her garden, which is not something that's visible to her and her husband when they're actually like in their garden, in their property. This is something that is only visible to people who are walking through this neighborhood and walking by. And her experiment of like, okay, can gardens create community? Can they create connections instead of pulling people apart? I think is something that is really, really borne out. And even the times that I would go visit her, people were constantly stopping, asking questions, people saying, I'm thinking about moving to this neighborhood. Can you tell me about it? Like, it is a catalyst for people to interact with each other and to forge a strong sense of community. And here you can see in the very background, if you can, this little boy leaning against the fence. So a very inspiring person, a very inspiring garden. And then I'll go in about 180 degrees from there to another garden, which is in a suburb of Pennsylvania, kind of a northern suburb. And this is an area that has a pretty amazing concentration of mid-century modern houses that were built after World War II. In many cases, houses that I learned this were created and purchased by people who were European emigres coming after World War II. And there was this connection to mid-century modernism, a lot of people who were intellectuals and professors and working at universities, musicians, designers. So there's a couple of these little enclaves of what are today considered important mid-century modern examples of residential architecture. And this is one. The owner's name is Craig Wakefield, also a really delightful person. He was a dentist for most of his career, got really into mid-century modern architecture, and um, then switched gears, became a realtor, and buys in and is an agent for mid-century modern homes. Just kind of his curiosity is kind of insatiable, and he taught himself how to garden. And with this house, when he purchased it, he spared no amount of work or labor to restore it exactly. So down to the knobs on the cabinets, like everything, the way that it would have been originally. His partner, I think, would have preferred the kitchen to be a little more 21st century, but it is very much like a very loyal sort of in reinterpretation of mid-century modern architecture. Now, the garden, what's interesting is that when you think about this style of architecture, there's not really an analogous style of gardening the way that there is with so many other architectural styles, whether it's Victorian or arts and crafts, or in the United States, the colonial revival movement. If you think of most landscapes that are around a mid-mod, as he would call it, home, I mean, they tend to be more about the void, the negative space, whereas the house is the positive space. Maybe there's a Japanese maple someplace, but not much. And he just decided that not only was he going to sort of like break all those rules, he just wasn't going to observe them to begin with. And he said, I just want the garden that I want. And so he went about creating it. And the first garden that he created was this one, which is really meant to be viewed from outside a set of floor to ceiling windows. And he put this reflecting pond in, and he did it cleverly so that when the sun hits it, it reflects to the back wall of this sort of large living room area. He created a bunch of little like miniature vignettes. And he used a lot of Corten steel. Here's a Corten steel sculpture that he installed in front of a 100-foot south-facing border, and just did a great job of matching these like corresponding colors of the catinus that have that kind of rusty iron hue within the blues and the purples, and the pinks that are going to contrast that. He also just was clever. This is a big kind of ugly storage unit that he hid by cladding it, and then also just putting this little row of very contained bamboo and some other plants so that it really is not visually offensive in any way. And then as he created these set series of gardens, he did such a great job of plants that have a lot of movement to contrast with this sort of like brutalist, really hard, severe lines of the house. So a lot of grasses, getting the colors that are going to speak to the house and the landscape. He put in this very naturalistic, I think lots of people in the book had COVID projects. This was his COVID project, this series of stone steps to kind of create terraces on this very steeply sloped property. Again, the warm colors. And then he was so sort of creative, and he just, got some steel rebar and had his guy make this series of circles, round pieces of just like round metal that he put on stakes. And it is such a beautiful little like mimicry of running water here. And again, the boulder cut in half with this minimalist slab for a bench. So that a really great garden. And then the last one that I will go into just really briefly is one that's further out. So this is one that's really inspired by the countryside. Be an 18th century farmhouse. The owner, David Culp, really sees this as like a child's drawing of what a house would be. It's very simple. And it's complemented by this negative space, which is a vegetable garden, almost the same dimensions of the house itself. So the positive and the negative, the picket fence, and then the garden for which this property is very famous is located in concentric circles around that. It gets a little less formal as you go out. And it's famous for having it never has a low moment. Like it's just like thing after thing after thing bursting into bloom. And a wonderful ruin garden. It's a Quaker garden. So there's really nothing in this garden that is not a usable or functional object. So there will be no decorative elements, even though it's a very beautiful garden. And this is just because, like David is a Quaker, and in that sort of Quaker religious belief system, you really don't want anything between you and God. There's no intermediary, and nature is the portal to the divine. And that's what we see here with anything that's in the garden as a non-growing element is second to the plants themselves and the overall picture. And then the garden that he's worked on and is the most proud of now is this garden, which again is not visible from his house, but it's a meadow garden. It is visible for anyone driving on this country highway. It's beautiful. He's worked on it a lot. He's very proud of it. And this garden is here to remind us all that, we're just one of the many, many creatures that God has created, and we all have to take care of each other. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Rob.
Wow, wonderful.
Okay, let me see if I can get this right. I think here we go. And start from beginning. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in this afternoon or this evening, wherever you may be. And I'm going to sort of parallel some of what Nicole's wonderful storytelling is with some storytelling about how I actually made some of these photographs. I think people find this interesting, especially if you challenge yourself with garden photography. There are some tricks, there are some secrets, and I'm going to tip my hand here and show a lot of what goes on behind the scenes of making photographs. I'm going to talk a lot about the elements of composition, the light, the geometry, the repetition, echoes, things that garden designers know too, of course, but and how they apply to photography. But first of all, but unlike many other artists, garden photographer, well, all photographers don't start with a blank canvas. We are handed something. We are given something that somebody created, and we sort of have to elevate that, improve it, and make it more beautiful. Actually, I say that is my job, is to take something beautiful and make it just a little more beautiful. And here's how I do it. Of course, you have to have a garden to start with. This garden wasn't ready, of course, but I knew it would look fabulous once it was planted, and indeed it was. This checkerboard Victorian um, annual garden here in the main line. And so when I returned and found it full and full of flowers, I said, "This is a nice picture." I could have walked away from it at this point, and I think I've had a relatively good photograph. But my thinking is always, how can I improve it? How can I push it? How can I finesse the photograph into being a little bit better, a little bit more interesting? And in this case, I decided, well, first of all, I have the focal point centered. And I think that's something that all of us tend to do probably a little too much, is to put whatever is prominent, the focal point, dead center. And by doing that, I think we really make the frame a lot more static. So what I do is I often look for ways to offset the focal point and include something else in the frame, like this little bench over here to the left, which all of a sudden starts making a more dynamic image, something that has a point and counterpoint here. There seems to be a dialogue between these two elements. And I do this in a lot of my photography to try to make pictures more interesting, more beautiful, more compelling. In this case, I use a lot of backlighting in my photography. It's, as much as possible. Backlighting is wonderful for plants because the plant world is so translucent that things become sort of like stained glass at times. But in this case, I think the backlighting and the direct lighting was not as successful because it created, the dappled light created a set of um, patterns on these existing patterns that were distracting. So I waited for a cloud to come by, and of course, this is the final result, which I think is much better, more clear, and much more beautiful. So you can see how the steps I've taken to just make a photograph a little bit more interesting. In this case, this is Charles Cressen's garden. I think Nicole talked a little bit about it. He's a third generation gardener who his grandfather lived in this house and gardened in this house. And he has many, many different collections. Um, and one of the collections he loves is camellias. And camellias are wonderful flowers. They come at a time of year when you don't have many flowers, usually late fall. But the trees themselves, the shrubs, can often look a little, I don't know, distraught, or are not poetic enough to make them a subject worthy of their own. So I went through his garden and I cut a number of blooms from the different camellias he has there. He does some breeding too. And I decided it would be nice to juxtapose those against elements of fall, which in this case would be, brown leaves. And I found a little backwater, a little side pool. He lives near a stream, and I floated the flowers onto the stream itself. And I thought, this is an improvement. I've sort of taken this and made this a more interesting photograph. I can tell a story here that's pretty complete. But I said, let me try push this a little further. And I found I had a bowl actually in my car from a previous shoot, a clear bowl. I thought, what if I floated them in water and then actually put the bowl into a shallow part of the stream, and then we get motion here too. We get a sense of water flowing over this arrangement, and still have the fall leaves to give us the sense of season. And I pushed it a little bit further by introducing a second bowl. I thought this again, taking the focal point, moving it off center a little bit, adding a secondary focal point makes for a more interesting image, something that sort of has something that you want to linger on a little bit longer. And I love the motion of the water here. And I decided at this point I would throw some leaves upstream and let them flow down around the bowls. And that creates this motion here. So you still get the sense of fall, you get the sense of moving water, which is nice, and you still get the beautiful camellia. So I thought that was very successful. I did adjust, and I don't do this often, but when it comes to water photographs, I often make the water a little bluer than it is, because I think it just makes it look like water in my mind. So that was the end point on that photograph. Here's an interesting one too. This was at a place called Doe Run. It's a very large estate property out in Chester County, and it has a deep horticultural history here. Sir John Thuron owned the properties up until I think 1990 something, and then a new owner took it over. And Sir John had always maintained this famous 35-foot wide perennial bed outside his house, and was just a wonderful, wonderful explosion of color come June or July. And when I come to gardens like this, I try not to frame them up too symmetrically. I find that symmetrical photographs, again, look a little stiff, a little boring, a little static. And so when it comes to a formal garden, I always try to move it in a direction or find a different angle to it that might make it more interesting. So the first thing I do is try to set the path off in a diagonal. So I got off to the left side of the path, and I'm shooting over toward over things. I'm backlighting here, of course. And you can actually see maybe at the top of the screen here, that's my finger at the very top, blocking out the sun, the disk of the sun, because when you do backlight things, you can often get a lot of a lens flare, and photographers use various things to control that. And sometimes it's the finger. Excuse me. I didn't find that very compelling. I went to another view, kind of a wider view, again from the left side, backlighting. Again, not having, not being satisfied with this. Excuse me, 1 minute. So I continued. I found a group of echinops, which I always find to be fascinating flowers. There's a lot of, I don't know, they seem to be very whimsical and imaginative flowers. And I thought this might be a nice foreground to this border, but of course the border gets lost. The echinop is too much about echinops, this picture here. So I raised myself up a little bit, got on a ladder, step ladder, and shooting down. The echinops are more in proportion now with the rest of the border. But again, this doesn't really show the border well. So I moved a little further back in the border on this view. Again, I'm trying to explore. There's a lot to consider here. What to put in the foreground and what to have in the background. It's a very big border, and how do I capture it in one photograph? I think I was more successful on the right side, shooting toward the left side, which is quite illuminated by the setting sun. I think this is just a little too much light in the background here, and also the plants in the bottom right here of the corner of the photo are a little dull. They don't really hold your interest too much. So I kept moving again. I found this arrangement, and I really liked the idea that you can see the rooftop of the one building there. It has a nice proportionality to it. Again, not satisfied. Moved here again. Another view, but the phlox I felt in the foreground was too bright and not interesting enough to hold that space. So by moving around, I'm working. I'm trying to finesse this image to make it the strongest image I can. And it really, you're sort of fighting time here. As you can see, the light is starting to drop, and it's very desirable at this point. But in another 10 minutes, there might not be any light in this border at all. And this is the final photograph that I settled on. I think this one sort of tells the story. The center is held beautifully by the Cleome against the phlox. And there's sort of a triangular arrangement here between the highlights. If you look in the corners, there's an internal geometry. Diagonals are very strong in photographs, and geometric shapes in general are wonderful if you can capture them. And there's a certain geometry here that I find very, very pleasant. At the same property, they had these three wonderful Great Pyrenees dogs that used to greet me in the garden. At first, they terrified me, but I realized they were really just sweethearts. But they big dogs, and they were very imposing. But they used to watch me from this door constantly. They were waiting for somebody to come out and take them for a walk. And the gardens by this door were also quite beautiful. Unfortunately, though, it was the light here is very frontal lighting the front of the subject. It's not a flattering light for gardens at all. But I sort of took the picture because I wanted to work on this later, and I wanted to remember this. You can actually see here the shadow of me in the foreground here. So this was not a successful photograph, but I saw the elements there, and I knew if I came back later in the day, the sun had moved on. So the garden now is just an open shade and is much more presented in a much more beautiful way. And the dogs, of course, they sort of are still there. And I waited, I think another, whatever, maybe 10 minutes, my 5 minutes, and I finally ended up with this picture, which I love because the dogs look so playful. And one of them got their toy, and I think all the light, everything is balanced in this picture here. And I especially like, maybe you can't see it, I'll do a close-up here of the way the echinacea cones sort of echo the dog's noses there. So I thought that was a sweet, serendipitous moment. Another garden that we covered was this one in Chestnut Hill, which is an old established garden of Philadelphia. This was an old mansion that the owners have renovated quite extensively, and they finally turned their attention to the gardens. And the gardens, of course, they're a bit of new gardeners, but very, very excited and learn and sort of grasp the idea of what a garden could be. The woman is an interior designer, so she had a really great sense of style as far as matching colors and textures throughout. But one of her important parts of this garden was was a vegetable garden. And, vegetable gardens are kind of functional and not necessarily beautiful. And even though there were elements in this that were kind of sweet and photogenic, I couldn't find one photograph that could tell the whole story. She had designed this and built this within the framework of an old tennis court. And because of the chain link fence, was useful because to keep the deer from eating the garden. And I really like some of the aspects. She did this homemade trellissier arbor for all her climbing vegetables. And I thought maybe I saw these market lights there strung across the garden. I thought maybe if I waited till twilight, I could get something more evocative for this garden. And of course, it's true, you can. And shooting these types of situations with you have working with night lights and ambient light, you have like a 20-minute window before one of them dominates too much. And so you have to wait till the overall ambient light is low enough so these lights glow, but not so much that they're glowing against a black backdrop. I found an elevated path by this garden too, and I was trying to get an overview of it. Unfortunately, the chain link fence is way too prominent in this picture. And I said, well, maybe I can sort of mask it a little bit, sort of change my angle, get a little bit tighter composition on it. And of course, the light is now becoming very rich and beautiful. It's this, like I say, there's a 20-minute window here that you have to work with. So I waited, and then I realized if I could just get over that fence a bit and take this picture, I'd had it made. And this was a tricky picture because two of my tripod legs were on rocks, and I'm sort of half hanging onto the chain link fence and half holding onto the tripod. It was a 15-second exposure, but you can see, and I had my f-stop. This is a little inside baseball here, but the f-stop was f16, which means all these specular points of light will get this nice starburst, which I thought was a nice effect for this garden to show it off. This garden also this had a solarium as part of the house, and the woman who was the designer, she incorporated so many wonderful elements into this. And again, there was some ambient lights here that I wanted to, or some interior lights that I wanted to balance with the ambient lights. So I sat and waited. Now here's what happens if I waited too long. I'm not sure what time of day this was, maybe 6 o'clock. This might have been 7 o'clock. And now the ambient light has fallen too much and the interior light is too bright. And it gets this almost gaudy look to it, which is a little too Thomas Kinkade for me, but I don't particularly care for it. And so I had to come back to another day when I could just time it right and get this nice balance of light. And I think it makes for a nice evocative photograph. I think this is the only interior in the book. And my final little story here is this garden over in Frenchtown, which is close to Bucks County. And this has a very, it was inspired by Capability Brown, I think, and has this pastoral look to it. The woman was a interior designer at one point, and then she became a trial lawyer. So she had, when she started gardening, she had a lot of ideas and a lot of wonderful help to create this for her. But one of the things that she loved and she had created here was making this a sanctuary for a lot of animals, a refuge for a lot of agricultural animals and other animals. And so, of course, she had some beautiful horses on the property. She had some beautiful goats, a pair of mute swans, and many other waterfowl. And her chicken coop, I thought, was fabulous because the wisteria sort of draped into it. And she said the chickens really did love the wisteria flowers as they dropped. So magnificent setting for a chicken coop. And this was one of the most contented cows I think I've ever seen in my life. Um, And also to add to this menagerie, she had peacocks strutting through the garden. And peacocks are like moving, living sculptures, and to have them uh, show up in places is just a wonderful treat for me. It really kept me on my toes, and I really wanted to catch one in display because the male display is so incredible. Um, but I was working with this one bird, and of course, he's displaying, but of course, this is not a good composition. This is a better look at it, but of course, he's on the driveway here, which is a macadam surface. It's not a very flattering background. So I kept working this. Even backlit. There's some drama here, but of course the road I think takes away, and the phone pole in the background. So it's a matter of just I can't move him, and he's going to go where he wants to go. Eventually, I think my most successful attempt at this was when he walked into this barberry parterre here. And I thought I'd chase him in or walk behind him in slowly. I love the colors of his blue gorge against the red barberry there. And as he turned around and started coming back, I thought maybe this is a good time. Maybe I'd get a good photograph. He seemed to be aware of me at this point, and as you can see, he'll move a little closer and he'll cover up the gap there between the hedges, which I thought that was perfect, well timed, well placed. And I thought this has the elements of making a great photograph. Um, and I started realizing that he has a conical shape here, and there's conical shapes in the background. There's an inverted cone with a river birch and a conical evergreen. I thought this is nice. We're echoing shapes here in a really strong way. And he just continued to extend his neck. And I thought, why am I shooting this as a horizontal? This is clearly a vertical picture. And so I swung my camera around. And again, I'm offsetting the focal point a little bit and allowing it to echo with the other shapes, creating a more dynamic photograph. And I think this is the final photograph that appeared in the book, or appeared in the book. Yes. So that's my part of it. Thank you so much. I'm not sure what we'll do next. Annie, it's up to
Well,
you.
yeah, I mean, well, you were talking about putting on some rolling images while we had a little chat, and we have a nice excuse for questions. So, can you do that? Is that easy enough to
Yep.
do?
Yep. It's on now.
Perfect, perfect. Well, we've got a couple of comments and questions already in, but I'm just giving people a chance to add to that. And I want to say, oh my goodness, this is like, not only are we having a window into this beautiful part of the world with these extraordinary gardens, but a photography masterclass at the same time, which thank you so much, Rob. It's very generous of you. A lot of photographers will just show you that final shot and won't give you the background. And gosh, that's so useful and so helpful. Thank you so much. That's absolutely amazing. Um, I've got a couple of questions before if anybody else wants to leap in, but starting with the photography, I know this is probably a really difficult question, but roughly on average, how many hours, days, or visits did you do to each garden, or is that too difficult to say?
We were very fortunate, and this was a local book, so I could visit these sites more than once.
Yeah.
I've done other books in other parts of the country where I've had like one day or one and a half days to photograph the garden, and hopefully it was beautiful then. But
Hmm.
this being a local book, I could visit some of these gardens. There was one in particular that I think I visited 8 or 9 times because I just couldn't get it right, and but all of them took multiple visits.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm sure. And the times of day and the light. I mean, your handling of the light is extraordinary. And again, I just love the way you've talked us through some of those photographs because it's too easy to say this is it, da-da, and it was simple when it wasn't. Um, and interesting, no people in any of the photographs. Now, was that a decision that you and Nicole made? Or was it a decision that the owners wanted to take a back seat? What's the story there?
We had considered it. Once you introduce people in the picture in the book, but they're in the background or you don't see their face.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but I think sometimes a human face can well, first of all, people can date a photograph very quickly too.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
uh, just by clothing styles and haircuts, they can look dated. The photograph
Yeah.
can quickly age. Whereas
Yeah.
some of these garden photographs will look, this garden will look the same in 20 years. Um, but I think we just decided that it would be better to leave it to have no people and just a few wonderful animal pictures in it.
Yeah, yeah. And I have met those dogs at Doe Run because
Oh,
I've been to Doe Run, I think 2 or 3 times. And I think on the second visit, we got a chance to go and look at the house. And as we got to the house, the door opened, out they bounded like these beautiful, great big dogs. And then, as it was sort of magically, the housekeeper came with this tray of freshly baked chocolate cookies. I
oh.
thought I'd died and gone to heaven at that point. It was just wonderful. It was so nice to see that photo of their little faces. Um, so yeah, and so no, and how much post-production do you generally do? You've been talking about, cropping and on site looking at different, but are you doing a lot of post-production when you get home?
No, not really. I mean, I sort of work with global adjustments of color and contrast and exposure, things that you could do in the dark room.
Yeah,
But I try not to do too much of that because there's a point where the photograph then starts looking artificial
yeah,
and
yeah,
not real. So I try not to take all the blemishes away.
yeah,
Um, but at the same time, I want to, it's this is not a representational medium. I'm going to make them a little. I'm going to elevate these gardens a little bit through the photograph. So
yes,
I,
yeah,
I do, but it's mostly simple moves in Lightroom with contrast, color, white point, black point. Easy enough for anybody can do. There even are applications on your iPhone now or any phone that
mm.
can where you can make photographs enhance them a little bit so that they just pop a little more.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. So I could hog the questions all night, but I'm not. I've got to hand over to everybody else. So Lois Moss is over in Seattle, and Lois is a friend of Garden Masterclass, and she's two nice comments and a question. Obviously, many people should know or possibly know that the public gardens in the region are all on a website called AmericanGardenCapital.org, and you'll see all of the many public gardens. And then Lois is actually following my chain of thought here. And it's, by any chance, Rob, would you do a class for a group who are visiting PA in May? They're staying 6 nights in Glen Mills, and they are the Hardy Plant Society of Oregon. So
Oh,
I will let you and Lois, I'll connect you and Lois on that one. So
okay.
but exactly at the same time, I was thinking, we need to get you to do a masterclass online for us too. So Lynn Sheridan's asking, what are these gardens like in winter? Well, of course, there's such a huge array, 21 different gardens. It's a difficult question, isn't it? Because they're so different, all the gardens too, aren't they? So I'm not sure if there's a quick answer to that. I don't
I
really.
mean, some, of course, are made with winter in mind and have a lot of bones and a lot of tree structures that really do make it delightful. I think we have one winter photograph in the book,
Mhm.
um, but it certainly is kind of the unsung season, and we really I it would have been nice if I and part of it is I hate the cold, I hate the snow. I'm not If I can avoid going out in it, I will. But there's sometimes when you get a dusting and you just say, "Oh my God, I have to get out there. And it's so beautiful."
Yeah, yeah, no, fair enough. How often do you use a tripod? This is Paula Simon's question.
I I used to use it almost all the time. A tripod's very useful for when we work with films that were slower and we had cameras that didn't have vibration reduction in them. So you really
Hmm.
needed a tripod when the light was a little low. But
Yeah,
now you can shoot at ISOs 800, 1600 if you got a good camera, even higher. I
yeah,
mean, it's amazing how much you can still handhold. But
yeah.
what I find a tripod almost completely useful for is finessing a composition. And there's nothing like it. I mean, to be able to like set a tripod up, look at all the corners, look at the composition, say, how can I adjust things one way or another to improve upon this? And
Hmm.
so in some situations, I use a tripod, even though I don't have to. I just want to make sure I get that composition correct.
Right, right. And I loved what you did in Charles Cresson's garden because again I've been there and it's very much a collection of plants, isn't it? With and from my memory, you know, in terms of focal points and sort of things to home in on, it's a little bit harder because it is like a botanical collection. And then for you to come up with this idea of the water in the bowls in the stream, I think was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Another tricky technical question from Carrie. Do you have a favorite camera and or lens?
That's a good question. I mean, the cameras are all so good these days. They're all
Mm,
fantastic. It's amazing. I use Nikons just because I've been using them for 30 years and I'm used to that system. The newer ones I like, they have a better autofocus. I use a Z6 III a lot now. A Z8 I love for larger compositions. Um, the lenses are greatly improved too. I mean, for garden photography, you don't need much of a range of lenses. I think, you know, a simple 24 to 70 will get you through a lot of it. I like a macro lens, of course, on top of that, and then on top, maybe the third lens I would choose would be the 70 to 200 to sort of get those compressed long views
mhm.
that are quite pretty. So I really don't need a lot to photograph a garden. I think really it's so much more of it is developing the eye
Yeah,
and slowing down and seeing things,
yeah.
thinking.
Slowing down is a good thing to say, isn't it? Yeah, that slowing down, which we're very bad at, aren't we? You know, yeah, actually looking. And then we've got a whole range of people saying what a wonderful presentation tonight, both enjoyed both of your sessions and how wonderful it is, and thank you very much, and lots of thank yous. What I'd like to do is I'd hate to turn these photographs off, and this one, that the one at Craig's garden at the moment, is particularly poignant for me. But if we have Nicole back so that we can just say sort of round up with Nicole there as well. um if that's possible to come out with screen share, is it? As much as I hate to turn your images off.
Sure. Okay.
That's lovely. Okay. Yes, just that image from Craig's garden is one that's very dear to me because Craig did my course at Chanticleer a couple of years prior to making, and that little bit he did with the rocks, he was really influenced by Lisa Roper's wonderful gravel garden. So it was really lovely to go and see Craig last year, and for him to say, "Do you know what? This is what did it for me," and just fantastic. It was lovely for me. So, oh gosh, I could chat to you both all night. It's just such a lovely thing to do on a grim winter's night to speak to you and suddenly be immersed in those beautiful gardens. But what a wonderful, wonderful project. And Rob, one other question. Have you, I know you've written over 25 books, I think. Are any of your books instructional, educational, how-to books, or are they all about gardens and things? I mean, have you done any sort of masterclass books?
I have not. I have not. And
Oh, there's time.
I know. I've been told, yes. Uh, I would like to do that. Yes,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
those winter projects. Yep.
yeah, yeah. And Nicole, a question for you. I mean, how many gardens were on your long list before you made the short list?
I think that we may have visited as many as 35 gardens before we cut down to 21. We were concerned we would have to cut even more, and the publisher agreed partway through the project to add 60 pages. So we didn't have to make any really heartbreaking cuts, which we
Good.
were trying
Yeah,
to avoid. Um, but the book could have been longer, although it
yeah,
would have become too heavy.
yeah. Yeah. Maybe a part two, maybe a part.
We were so fortunate to work with a publisher who really valued this project,
Ah,
who really saw that, you know, if we make this book beautiful, if we use beautiful
mm,
materials and expand it, and I have to say they really did a very light edit on Nicole's words, which were beautiful and
mm,
poetic,
mhm.
and they let us sort of pick the pictures and move things around as during the design process. So it was
That
a
is wonderful.
wonderful process.
Well, I know it's easy to find in the States, and we were talking before we went on air about possibly trying to find a way that we could link people who are over on this side of the pond and find a link for buying it. So we'll try and work something out, and certainly by the time we put it up onto YouTube, to make it a little bit easier because I'm personally really keen that people from this side of the pond get a feeling for how rich the gardens are there in terms of, you know, blowing those sort of preconceptions of American gardens, really. And it was interesting. Yesterday I was talking to a student at West Dean, and she'd had a not a very good trip to the States, and she wasn't that enamored with it, and blah blah blah, and she, you know, and I said, oh, what a shame you didn't go to this particular area, because of just the natural landscape around there is so soft, rolling, gentle, inviting, and then you've got all of these hidden treasures which are there to be, you know, hopefully would be nice to go and see. So yeah, so thank you both so much. It's been absolutely lovely just stepping over there and looking into those gardens again. And some of them I know, and some of them I really want to go to David Culp's garden. That's so high on my list. I forget about it every year, but what a magical space. I'm sure he's an incredibly intriguing person too.
And very genuine.
Yeah. So Nicole and Rob, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Noel. Thanks to everyone who joined this evening. It's great to be all together.
Well, it's lovely, and I'm sure we'll have you back. And I would say good luck with the book, but you don't need it. It speaks for itself. It's absolutely beautiful. So, looking forward to your next project together, which I won't press you on, but let's hope there is one in the makings. Anyway, listen. Take care. Have a lovely rest of the day, you guys, and hopefully see you before too long. Hopefully see you in the summer. Hopefully see you when I'm over.
Thank you all.
That would be
Okay.
wonderful.
Take care.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.